My career journey before I came to Audible was definitely not a straight line. In fact, I started off after my master's in international affairs wanting to be in the government, in the foreign service. It wasn't until someone looked me straight in the eye and said, make sure you go to Wall Street, then it's time to come back to the government and make a difference. I did decide to go to Wall Street and take a role as a business person on the trading floor. I worked on the trading floor until one day the CEO of an old investment bank that's no longer with us, Lehman Brothers, tapped me on the shoulder, pounded his fist on my desk and said, Ann, men run in packs, women don't. Go create your pack. And those were my marching orders to start the first diversity initiative at Lehman Brothers. So after a year of putting the women's initiatives in place, I was asked again to step off the trading floor and become the company's first chief diversity officer. It was a role that I cherished and loved and learned about cultural issues worldwide and was able to drive real measurable change. And when Lehman Brothers went bankrupt, I had another choice. Was it to stay on the HR side or was it to go back to the business? And ultimately, my passion lay in all the work that I was doing around people, driving their careers forward, and making it a more inclusive and just workplace. I then went on to work for Bloomberg to really reinvent what HR means at Bloomberg, but it ultimately came to a place where I had to make another decision in my life. And as many people know, careers are nonlinear, and I had been working for 28 years as a working mom and decided it was time to take a year off and spend time with my family. During that year, I had the great fortune to be introduced to Don Katz, and a few months later, I found myself here at Audible as the Chief People Officer. Similar to my career, we've experienced lots of ups and downs, lots of turbulences, whether they be bankruptcies or recessions, or even just the pulls of family. Ultimately, every career is going to have a different path. And each one of you need to determine what will your path be going forward. Your career is a journey, and it's made up of many decisions.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for tuning in today. My name is Sharif Duncan. I'm part of the communications team. Joined by me is Erni, our Chief People Officer, and Howard Tucker, a VP of Talent and Culture. Now, we just did a bit of intros, about us, so we'd like to know about you. Please begin commenting, share your organization. If you're in school, share your school or your profession, whatever you prefer. And we know we have some Audible-lites tuned in, so thanks for joining in. Now, while you're commenting and sharing where you work or go to school, just want to reinforce that it is National Career Development Month. And at Audible, we've coined it National Career Journey Month because it's the way that we approach careers, which you'll hear about later on in discussion. But to celebrate this month, I can ask you guys to continue to follow us all month long because we'll be sharing different career tips, advice, and also audiobooks. Now, speaking of audiobooks, one particular question at Audible that everyone asks each other, and we'll kick this off as an icebreaker, is what are you listening to? So since it's National Career Journey Month, I'd like to kick off the icebreaker with Ann and Aaron and ask them, what career book, audiobook have you listened to? And it could be a career themed or any type of audiobook that maybe had some career advice in it.
Sure. Well, I'm happy to kick it off, Sharif, and thank you for hosting us here today. I'm reading or listening once again to a book that I listened back in high school, which was Daisy Miller by Henry James. And it may be kind of an unconventional book to recommend from a career perspective, but frankly, I always think about Daisy Miller as a character who dared to be herself. She was a nonconformist, and she knew what her superpowers were, even in times that weren't always accepted by society. And I would say that anyone thinking about their career should understand what separates themselves, what distinguishes them, what are their superpowers. And I always admired the fact that she kept, she really remained herself in all situations, for better, for worse. And sometimes it doesn't always end up right, but she was true to herself.
Wow. I have to listen to that one. How about you, Howard?
Cool. Well, I just want to say I'm also happy to be joining you guys. I would say Let My People Go Surfing. So by Yvonne Chouinard, who founded Patagonia. And I started listening to that actually when I first joined Audible about 3 years ago, because I was really interested in how could I help transform employee experience. And I think Patagonia has done something really special where they've taken a love of the wilderness, of conservation, of nature, and figured out not only how to market that to people, but also how to infuse it into who they are as a company. And I feel like we do that a lot here at Audible too. And so mission-driven companies always excite me. And that was a really good view of somebody who took a passion and turned it into a mission.
Wow. That's another one I have to add to my listen.
Yeah.
So let's get started, shall we, with the questions. Now, a reminder, I have a few questions, but I encourage everyone to continue, add your questions in, because toward the end, we'll answer your questions. Sounds good? All right, let's get started. Now, Anne, we just watched this amazing video of your career journey, so to say. And, you were very adamant about that very few careers are linear. In fact, you said many careers are non-linear. So the audience has, we just saw your story. Ara, I'm curious. Has your career journey also been nonlinear?
I was thinking about this and kind of like, how did I end up where I am today? And when I was in high school, I wanted to be a screenwriter or a psychologist. And so I'm neither of those today. But when I was thinking about that, I said, how did I go from that to law school to, working in financial services, higher education, the law, focusing on diversity and inclusion, and here at Audible? And I think for me, the rear view is much clearer than it was along the way.
Correct.
But essentially, the story has always been important to me, and what motivates people to move forward, either as a company or as individuals. And so while I'm not a screenwriter or a psychologist, every day it's really important to focus on what's the story I can help people or organizations tell to unlock their creativity. So
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. In fact, my sister, she's done like a lot of different things in her career, and she was like, I'm all over the place, thinking she has to have a linear career path. So hearing you guys saying you actually don't, and it'll ultimately lead to where you need to be, it's great to hear. All right. So I want to ask you guys, so there's two popular terms that, widely used in organizations. Okay. So the first one is fast fails and lessons learned. So I want to ask you both, as you said, you've had nonlinear careers, you've taken risks. Have there been any fast fails, lessons learned along the way? And how do you feel that it contributed to your, ultimate success?
Absolutely. And by the way, you will have fast fails and career pivots all the way through your career without a doubt. And it's really a matter of how you frame them, reframe them, and then recover from them. But I would say to you, just even if I go back to the very beginning of my career, I was an international relations major, graduated, wanted to be a diplomat, and found myself on Wall Street in a corporate finance training program, taking accounting, corporate finance, statistics. And I would just look at you and say, I was not the worst in my class out of 50. I was the penultimate worst. So I was ranked 49 out of 50. I got D- on most of my tests. And ultimately, I was put in probably the least sexy assignment upon graduating from this corporate finance class. And I was put into a corporate banking group, did middle market banking. But one of the really amazing ways of reframing that was, even though I dealt with little itty bitty companies with very little risk at the time, I was able to get to know the CEOs, the CFOs, and ultimately won in 1991, one of the largest IPOs for the company that year, which was IPX, Interpool. And I learned everything you could possibly know about container shipping and chassis. But the point was, even though I was the worst in my class, I was able to do something with it and by reframing. And then I think you were talking about sort of other fast fails or other ways of recovering. Yep. I think it would be remiss of me not to share the fact that I was part of Lehman Brothers, loved that company for nearly a dozen years, and went through the collapse. And that really could have been the end of a career. I mean, over 10,000 people were out of work. And, I have to tell you, my last day at Lehman Brothers was not easy. And my daughter actually, it was Halloween when I left, and she somehow didn't know I was home, and she decided to cut school with her friends. They drove a truck through the side of our house. Oh, wow. Our house was condemned. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, the world is in a financial Armageddon. My house is about to fall down, and I've lost my job. What am I going to do? And I would tell you that it was not for the contacts and the networks that I made while working in my old role. a very dear colleague of mine reached out and said, hey, I just started at Bloomberg. I'm head of HR. I could really use your help. Why don't you come work with me? So this notion of going from, the worst in your class to kind of reframing to going through massive bankruptcy and being able to pivot your career, they're all part of everybody's story.
That's awesome. How about you, Ara?
Wow, no cars. But I also will go on the Wayback Machine. In college, I was the sales director of a radio station. So our radio station, while it was student run, it was actually 30,000 watts on FM dial, so up like 103.3. And our clients were local, national, and regional businesses. And so as part of my role as sales director on a quarterly basis, I had to go to our board of trustees who were alums, and they would say, how are sales? And my first meeting, I was like, they're not great. And they were like, well, whose fault is that? I said, the music director, the program director. They were like, no, it's your fault. And I was like, oh my God, what are you talking about? So for me, that was actually one of the first lessons of what true teamwork is, because I had been on sports teams growing up. I played tennis. I was the captain of the team. And I knew that you had to rally people around a mission. But at that moment, I was on my own mission. I'm going to make the sales, but I'm not going to figure out how to collaborate with people. And it was a sobering moment. But as Anne was talking about, it's really not the failure. It's how do you sort of readjust and recover. And so, I could have just said, you know what, I still don't like this music. I'm leaving. I stayed, and I actually spent summers with my fellow board members, because usually I was just in the sales office making calls. And I realized that there was so much more we could have done together. And I realized that, the program guide was actually the thing that people wanted to advertise in. And so we figured it out. And I think for me, that's been something that I've carried with me. Like, collaboration takes work, and it takes empathy, and it takes really being able to be humble about what you don't know and that other people need to help you. So we increased our ad revenue, but it wasn't me alone. It was actually the whole team.
That's great.
Great story.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, definitely one team.
One team, we say that a lot,
One team,
right?
one dream.
Yeah. So the second term that I wanted to get your thoughts on, bring your whole self to work. So it's another popular one that we hear. However, I don't know if there's a twist with this one. The introvert extrovert, that whole concept of an introvert extrovert. Do you feel that being, and I would say more for maybe an introvert, do you feel like maybe it could hinder someone's career in terms of like bringing your whole self to work? So I'm curious to get your thoughts on it.
Well, I'm the extrovert, so why don't I hand it over to my colleague who's more introverted, and no judgment in that, of course.
That's right. The thing I appreciate about Anne is that she sees all of me and allows me to be all of me. But I will say, being an introvert, it's something that I think intuitively, that you're somebody who's thinking before you're speaking, you're sort of taking things in, you're assessing. But it wasn't until after working in a law firm, as a junior associate, it's not whether you're an introvert or extrovert. It's like, are you organized? Can you answer the client's questions? Like, can you just get things done? But I was interviewing for a job. I was working at Princeton. And I realized that sitting across from me, interviewing me, was a truly expressive, extroverted person. And I said, I could continue to just kind of be really like quiet and analytical, but that's not what she actually needs from me. And so I also couldn't become a super extrovert like on the spot. So I said to her, I just want you to know I'm really excited about this opportunity, but this is probably my excitement level. Like, this is what you're going to see. And, I think it was for her very helpful, because I wasn't necessarily going to become an extrovert, but I was clearly pushing myself to acknowledge that there was a bit of a difference. So, being a team leader, I'm now much more sensitive to what kind of energy do I need to push up or push down, depending on the mode or the thing or the person that I'm trying to interact with. So.
No, and I really appreciate even just your being able, if you're reading the room and that you may not be being able to provide what that person looks like, to actually verbalize it, I think it helps so much. I would also just want to add, as a leader, I think it's so important that leaders read the room and make sure all the voices at the table. So just because someone is quiet doesn't mean they're not engaged or they're not thinking. Mm-hmm. So to call out that person in the room, to bring their ideas to the table, to think about the video conference or the whoever's on the phone, it's really important to say, hey, Ara, what do you think? I know it's hard to get your voice in, but I think that's really important. And as an extrovert, I try to also calm myself and not speak over others, and also read how to modulate my energy.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I think I've heard both of you guys in several meetings. If someone's quiet, what do you think? And that's a great approach. All right, so just to take a pause, if you're just joining, just want to let you know that we're joined by Erni, Chief People Officer, Ara Tucker, VP of Talent and Culture, and we're talking about career journeys. So far we've talked about fast fails, lessons learned, nonlinear careers, and I like to change it just a little bit because we've talked about people basically just doing your thing and kind of adapting to the change and being flexible. So this one is for you. And do you feel, since you have to be flexible and adaptive, is there a need for a career plan? And at some point in someone's career, is it no longer needed?
Absolutely. No, it's a great question. And I think Ara mentioned earlier, you can, when someone says, tell me about yourself, it's always easy to connect the dots because, hindsight is 20/20. And I would say everybody should have some vision of where they want to go and sort of work towards that. But ultimately, and I joke, for those of you who've watched the old show Sex and the City, Carrie always started off with some rhetorical question, which she said, if I make the wrong choice, will I miss my destiny? And I think about that often, that every choice is going to have, a benefit and a consequence. But I truly believe there's always an opportunity to stop and go off on a different branch. And I think when I look back at my career, there are moments that happened that I would have never envisioned that I would have ended up where I did. And I worked in the trading floor at certain points in my career. And being one of the few women that were on the trading floor as a senior vice president, I was tapped on the shoulder to really lead our women's network at the time. This is back in 2000. And that was really kind of pivoting me from kind of a commercial, trading floor oriented life to moving into more of an HR world, which I didn't realize was as hard as it seemed at the time. But I do think you need to think about that when you're in your 30s. Well, let's put that. Your 20s is when you establish who you are and your credibility. Moving on to your 30s, both men and women are concerned about their career, how to balance career and family. And it's, what we often call the perfect storm, where you're trying to figure out, how can I have a family, find a soulmate, have a family, and still keep my career on track. And 40s is sort of you're settling in and actually like almost solidifying who you're going to be for the next 20 years or so. And I'd have to say, I don't want to give away my age, but in your 50s, it's really a place where you feel so much more, yourself and you know what you want to do. But it's also a place where, to your point earlier, where you become more missionary versus mercenary in terms of what you want with your career. And working for a company like Audible, where we are missionaries, not mercenaries, and we're a company that means more than it does in terms of what we do with the community and what our product means to us. So I would say, I do think you need to have kind of a long arc of a vision, but know that you're going to make decisions that are going to take you off course, and just be conscious and deliberate about it as you move along that continuum.
Nice. That's great. I'm just curious. So, because you're the head of the Chief People Officer of Audible, what's next what's part of your career plan?
So I love my job, and I hope to be doing it for a while longer. But I do think about the fact that I've had experience in, at least a half a dozen really important companies with different business models and different products. And someday I would love to be. I've also served in not-for-profits. I'm chair of the board of two, really important not-for-profits, the Center for Talent Innovation, as well as the Nature Conservancy. But I think I would love to cut my teeth on a public board someday.
Nice. Awesome.
So that's something that I think about in terms of like what would be next.
Yeah, awesome. And you mentioned a lot about like Audible's, philosophy. So I'd like to get really Audible specific now.
Sure.
Earlier, I talked a little about, National Career Journey Month, and we purposefully named it that. So Ara, I'd like to ask you about Audible's, career philosophy and even why we call it career journeys.
Yeah, so I think it's a lot of what we've been talking about today, right? We want to make sure that people know it's not where you start or where you end up. And in some ways, it's kind of the journey along the way. And so with our careers here, we think about a number of different stages, right? It's not just about getting promoted. There's when you're first in your role, like you want to really do well, right? So you want to launch. We think about growing, like is the container something where you might know what you're doing and doing a good job, but there are like places where you can grow and add. If you want to broaden, like you might be in a role and you're like, I could actually take on a little bit more over here, but I don't want to necessarily leave what I'm doing. And then there are shifts. I think Anne and I have talked about a lot of our shifts, but even within Audible, you may want to go from one side of the business to the next. And a lot of people have done that. And then obviously there are moments in your career where you do advance, but I think for us, it's much more holistic. And so one stage isn't better than the other. I'd say the other piece of it is that when you're on a journey, it's more fun to have people along with you. And I think that, Anne and I have both benefited by having lots of people along the way. And so we've been thinking about, as a company, how do you facilitate that kind of support? And so one of the ways is equipping our managers. So really thinking about, if I'm a manager, what's my role in helping somebody as they're navigating their career? Not necessarily telling them what to do, but really being that coach, that person who's sort of translating between what does the business need and what does this person need, and how can I help align those things together? And then also thinking about, how do we build talent strategies and talent management processes that actually get those inputs both from individuals and from the company, so that we are marching along at least the same path. And, we might deviate here and there, but the idea is to be more transparent and expose people.
So, I want to just say to Ara, I think it's amazing that, Audible has sort of this very kind of progressive look at like different stages of your career. And everyone often thinks, oh, I just need to get promoted. But the fact of the matter is you can progress in your career, you can earn more, you can gain stature and scope of responsibility without having to go up. But I also think it's really important too that people own their careers and look for mentors and ideally earn the right to sponsorship. And I think as we think about our careers, there have been moments where if it weren't for someone who believed in us and were willing to put their political capital on the line and invest in us, take a risk on us, we wouldn't be in the roles that we are today. And I think it's really important that people think about who are their mentors and get a kind of a board of sponsors if you can.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. Now, I can go on and on asking questions, but I'd like to hear from you, audience. So if you haven't already, please start typing in your questions. I'm gonna actually take a look right now. I'd see, wow, it looks like we have quite a few already, which is awesome. So let me see here. So the first one is, what tips do you have for a woman entering a male-dominated field?
All right. I'll be happy to take that. I grew up on Wall Street. It was absolutely a male-dominated, testosterone-driven place. And I think, kind of from my opening comments about Daisy Miller, I think as a female, you have to learn to be, really understand what differentiates you, what's your superpower, and honestly understand the environment you're in. When I was a young woman in the industry, it was harder for me to call out sexism. But I could stand up to it, and resilience to move on. I think the workplace today has changed radically with the Me Too movement, and with corporations and really truly investing and believing in diversity and inclusion and belonging. But I think it's very important for women to stay focused, to understand that comments or things that happen shouldn't derail them, and they should hit them straight on. I think the workplace is much more open today. And I would even just say, now being in HR, it's not such a scary place. But if things overtly happen to you that have set you back or put you at risk, to please, feel like you can gain confidence in either your boss, if that's possible, or HR. But I think it's really important, most is to know what value you bring to the table and emphasize that at all times.
All right, so let's see what else we have here. How do you identify your competitive advantage?
How do you identify? Well, so Anne was just talking about superpowers. I think it is a little bit about reading a situation. The things that served you potentially in your last role may not serve you in your next role, and always thinking about, how do I gain that edge that not really serves you as an individual, but always think about who's the end user? Is it your team? Is it your company? Is it your customer? Is it somebody else, the community? Because I think when you're more customer focused, and we talk about customer obsession a lot here, it helps you tune in to what you need to do to help somebody or help something. And it's a lot easier than kind of digging in and saying like, oh, I'm a really good writer. Okay, but maybe you need to be a good listener, and that might be something you can flex. So I think that it's just gaining awareness, also asking people. I'm really fortunate. My mom's second act career from going from being a physician in corporate America is an executive coach. And so we do a lot of assessments. And it's really, it can be really interesting to know how other people perceive you so that you can work on, you might think you have a strength, but it might not actually be serving you in the moment. So.
And Aaron, I think that's such a great point, because there's probably like two things you need to know about yourself. You need to understand your personality type, like introvert, extrovert, detail-oriented, right? Type A, type B, detail-oriented, big picture, imagine the possible. Someone who's just working, who's great at execution and making it real. So really understanding your personality. And then the other piece is also to understand your technical expertise. And I think you need to bring a little bit of both to your job.
And your reputation.
And your reputation, right?
That's a good one. Okay, so the next question. It sounds like the team at Audible did not start off in the Audible industry. Is Audible still open to hiring new employees outside of Audible's industry?
I say the word is absolutely. In fact, at Audible, we have our people principles, and we really are looking for people who can be inspired by culture and technology and make it real, imagine the possible. And I think, the whole notion of synthesis and synthesis of bringing two different things together to create something that no one would have thought of is very much in our vocabulary. And we have a new word in our vocabulary, which is fire starters. And we are looking for people here at Audible who can imagine a new business, a new product, a new feature, think ahead of what our customers need. And so we're looking for people to come here and be fire starters. And you can come from all walks of life, whether it be from the arts and sciences from media or finance. I think we have also, we have tech, we have content, we have all the G&A functions. There is a lot for people to do. So really don't think of yourself as just a media person when you come here, but you can really come from many different places.
And make a difference.
Yeah.
The next question. So careers are full of mountains and valleys. And when you're in a valley, how do you stay focused and not lose hope of making it back to the mountaintop?
Oh, that's a good question. I've had a lot of valleys, I think, especially early on, because I think, when Anne was talking about in your 20s, you're really trying to solidify who you are. And, I was practicing as a lawyer, and it can be tough. And I remember my stepmom said to me, because I was like, I just have to leave. I just have to not do this anymore. And she was like, okay, but don't run away from it. Run to something. And I think that when you're in a deep, dark place, you really need to sort of dig in and think about, who am I and what do I need? And so it can help because puzzle pieces can change, whether it's a disagreeable colleague or maybe a work assignment you don't love, that could flip in a switch. And so instead of darting away, really figure out, is there an opportunity that I might be missing? And if it really is time to leave, then at least you're more thoughtful about where you want to go next.
That's great. Yeah, I would add, Sharif, I think it's so important to build relationships and networks of people before you need them. And so when especially when you're in your peaks, and they can be within your industry, they can be within your company, they can even be in your general outside interests. If you're passionate about the environment, or you're passionate about, the homeless situation in our cities. But then when you do hit your valley, it's being able to network, be able to call on people to give you advice, even call on people to listen to you, to help you figure out what are your, what do you bring to your table, and think differently about where you can take your career.
That's really good. So the next question is, can Ann and Ara talk a little bit about mentorship, sponsorships, and how they have influenced your career journey?
Absolutely.
Well, so I want to make a distinction, as we're talking about mentors and sponsors, and Anne's really talked a lot about this, but I think about the mentor as the person who's your coach, and you're asking them, hey, I need advice on X, Y, or Z. What do you think? How can you help? The sponsor is the person who may be advocating for you when you're not in the room, the person who's giving you the assignments. You kind of sees that like next thing for you and is like really, as Anne said, using your political capital to help you make it happen. I'd say I haven't always been great about asking for help. You know, in some ways it's like I'm prideful and I'm like, I need to know the answer. But as I get more senior, I actually find that I'm asking more questions and asking people in lots of different spaces. And I think it's good when you ask people outside of your field, because sometimes they have a really different way of looking in. My wife is a painter and she doesn't work in corporate America, but some of the best career advice I get is actually from her because she has a very different way of looking. So she's one of my big mentors. Yeah.
That's great.
I think it's so important to really understand the difference between mentoring and sponsoring, because mentoring is easier to obtain. You know, you just should ask someone, and I rarely think anyone will say no. I think people are genuinely flattered if you say, hey, I need some advice. And that's what a mentor gives you, is advice and guidance. A sponsor is something you have to earn. You know, and it's ultimately, you work for someone, you make that person look good, and they're invested in keep making sure you're successful, because it's sort of this, I don't want to use the word quid pro quo, but it's this notion of really like you, it's a symbiotic relationship where you help each other.
Yeah.
And as a result, your sponsor is willing to invest in their political capital to push you along. And I would say in my career, I've had two major sponsors who've really actually also helped me do things that I didn't think that I could do, and take me to the next level. And I would think back to one who really moved me from the business side to HR, and then one who really helped me step up to become head of HR at a time when I didn't have experience in all aspects of what that means. So I think someone has to really be willing to take a risk on you as well, and stand behind you and teach you things as you're moving along.
Wow, that's great. It's really good. So audience, we're coming to a close soon. I do have one more question, and it's really career advice, which I feel like all of us can use. So I'm gonna ask Anne and Hour any career advice I'd like to leave you with. I'd also ask you, keep the conversation going. Share your career advice too by commenting. And after Anne and Hour share their advice, we're gonna close with the best advice video from our employees, okay? So be sure to kind of, stay tuned, don't log off yet, and also continue to follow us all month long. So with that, any advice you'd like to leave the viewers with?
So I think my best advice came when I was promoted to managing director earlier in my career, and it was a beautiful silver box, and engraved on the top was a quote from Abraham Lincoln. And it said, "It's funny, it seems the harder I work, the luckier I get." And I would say to you that success in a career is a little bit of everything. It is obviously a little bit of luck. There's certainly like being in the right place, the right time, and meeting the right people. It is certainly about subject matter expertise, and learn your craft and study your craft and do it on the weekends and in the evenings and read. But also I always emphasize this to the people who work with me. I emphasize this to my own children, but I think it's really about inputs and outputs. And, you will get out of something what you put in. And I genuinely believe that good old hard work, with a combination of advice, luck, mentors, sponsors, good career choices, really is a great, combination for a terrific career.
That's great.
So I have two pieces. One is just ask for what you want.
Yes.
People are not mind readers, and there's a way to ask for it in a way that's compelling. Give them a reason. Make it hard for them to say no, right? Like whether it's your credibility, whether it's the network you're bringing with you, like just be really clear and crisp, because you never know who might give you that next opportunity. And then I'd also say, we get so bogged down in like what our job title is or what our role is and what we do. But, I think sometimes if you focus on what you do and how it fuels who you are, then that will probably be a more rewarding way of going through life.
That's great advice. So again, audience, share your advice as well. We're going to close again with the best career advice video. So thanks for tuning in. And again, follow us all month long. Actually, follow us. Just continue to follow us.
Come join our career journey.
Right.
Yes. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
you.
Have a great weekend.
The best advice that I received at my time at Audible came from a woman who had a career path that I've always wanted to follow. And she said, Her career path wasn't a ladder. Every which way she went, and I see this in myself, she learned something new and was able to apply those skills to the next step.
Drop the emotion, learn the lesson. Failure actually is a stepping stone and not a judgment on your capabilities or abilities.
Unless you're celebrating your own successes, then people, they just don't know about it. And if they don't know about it, then they can't reward you for that. To communicate better.
Connecting with people at Audible is important across all levels. It's really important to have that connection.
You're helping them out in some ways by bringing value to the table. It naturally inspires people to get invested in you.
Volunteer for the things that scare you. You're going to see the benefits just personally and professionally from taking the risks of doing the things that scare you.
Take control of your one-on-one with your manager. It really is your responsibility to come prepared and own it.
Go after something that intrinsically motivates you.
Don't try to be a hero. Rely on the skills and the gifts that people around you bring to the table.
Think about what you can do to support your wider team and support everybody through that.
Take on the opportunity that comes your way. You never know where your current opportunity or future opportunities are going to take you. So it's really important to go into the unknown and say, yes, I'm going to try that.